Another fantastic session. So we have Chris,
Yes.
who's going to be talking about maximizing finance transformation, return on investment. And me, from my FP&A background, I'm really, really looking forward to this one. Over to you, Chris.
Great. Hi, I'm Chris Lloyd-Mostyn, and I'm going to go through finance transformation, return on investment. So for the last 10 years, I've been working in finance transformation for BT. And what I'm going to do is go through 5 steps which I think you need to take to maximise your return. So where are we as an industry? Where are we in an organisation in finance transformation? So a Gartner survey recently said that 69% of organisations are progressing slower than they think they should be. And 30% are failing to deliver their benefits that they plan to do. So it's not a great story, really. So in terms of ROI, first of all, so what is ROI? We always use the term, but what is ROI? Or should I say, what is your ROI? Because I think ROI means different things to different people and different organisations. So I think you do need to start with that. Well, the simple answer is just benefits minus costs divided by costs. Okay, but that's just a simple answer, so I'll scrap that. You need to consider the wider elements of return. So firstly, have a really clear vision of where you want to get to and how transformation is going to deliver that. And then secondly, you need to make sure that's aligned to the organisation, aligned to the strategies, aligned to the vision. So if you're private equity and you're selling up in 3 years, you're trying to maximise value. If you're a fast-growing company and you need scalability, you might have a different agenda. Or if you're in a shrinking market and you need to perhaps reduce your cost base. So you've got to think through those. And then you need to think, what are the wider stakeholders, and make sure you're aligned to that. So customers, suppliers, government, the planet. I mean, there's just so many other considerations that need to go into this decision. So when you've done all those and you've considered everything, now agree what your ROI should be. So I was talking about BT. So in terms of the BT, so 6 years ago, the BT systems and processes in finance were outdated. And in fact, they weren't just outdated, they were not integrated together. They were central, they're not heavily customized. There was no standardization. It was ripe for a transformation. And that created challenges. So I've talked through some of the challenges that we had 6 years ago, because that was the base of how we then progressed. So technology, 75% of our 100+ finance systems were effectively had a security risk or a business continuity risk. So it was massive. Controls, 800+ controls, 80% were manual. Now it should be the other way. It should be that 80% should be automated at least. So a big gap. Our processes were slow. So example, month end was taking 3 or 4 days longer than a typical peer. So real slow process. And then our reporting was outdated and not fit for purpose. So example, 11%, only 11% were actually forward-looking reports. So that meant that as we didn't have the systems in place, we couldn't make efficiencies, we couldn't standardize, we couldn't centralize, we couldn't automate. All these things that we wanted to do, we weren't in a position. So what we did is we put a plan together to do a transformation. And this is a very, very high-level summary of a plan. But essentially, it was 3 phases that we did. So phase 1 was looking at our general ledger and looking at our reporting and our consolidation. Phase 2 was our sub-ledgers, so things like fixed assets, intercompany. And phase 3 was all the end-user systems like expenses and purchases. So, okay, we've got a plan together. How are we going to maximise our return on investment? So step 1 is building a credible and robust business case. So we said, fine, we'll do that. So looking at the first area, investment cost. this was the largest SAP implementation in Europe. How do we get case studies that are going to be sizable in that size that we're going to be able to compare against and actually work out a cost build? Pretty difficult. So what do we do? Well, we could source some case studies of large organisations that have been through transformation. We used our external advisors and their experience and put that into the mix. We did bottom-up builds, top-down builds, kicked it around. We put a sizable contingency on our cost build, and then we looked at the sensitivities. So we came up with something that we thought was reasonable to go to a business case. Then we looked at our benefits. So our benefits were, and I'm talking about financial benefits, we knew we could make efficiency savings, massive efficiency savings. We knew we had a big organisation. We had over 4,000 people just in finance. So we knew we could do it, but what was the prize? How did we know? So what we did is we used external benchmarking, and we looked at best in class, top quartile, and then we compared that to where we were and then did a gap analysis and said, right, well, that's best in class, we're here, we think we can get, 75% of the way. So we put that into the business case. We looked at our IT costs, we looked at our cost base, and we said, where will we be when all our systems are implemented and we've got modern systems? Where will that cost of ownership take us? And we assessed that. The third area in the business case was our baseline. So to do a return on investment, you obviously need to know where you're starting on. You need to know what you're returning against. And we called that the do nothing case. So we didn't have a clear baseline. Now, you might think a clear baseline, well, we just take your cost base and that's your clear baseline. But the clear baseline is where you're going to be in 10 years. This is a long-term program. And in 10 years' time, we're still comparing where we would be if we didn't do the program or where we would be if we did do the program. So that 10-year horizon is quite difficult. I mean, how many people know where they're going to be in 10 years? So that was hard. So we had to inevitably make assumptions. And one of the examples was upgrade avoidance. So we calculated, we thought we'd make about £25 million worth of system upgrades, even if we didn't do any finance transformation. So we'd still have to spend that just to keep our systems going and upgraded. The other thing with our baseline is we needed to have it flexible enough that when assumptions, as time went on, we could revalidate our assumptions to ensure that we're actually comparing a real do-nothing scenario. And then the last thing was it needed to be very, very independent, because if you've got a number which is almost like seems to be a bit fictitious and you're trying to build a return on it, there's a tendency to sort of like move things around to make your returns look better. So that had to be really, really controlled and a proper governance in place. So we've got our financials. Then we needed to look at the risks and the opportunities. And then it was really, really important to get the senior stakeholder and buy-in at the senior level. So our seniors were completely on board, which we did, and that helped us get a board approval. So this is the sort of the framework we put together for our business case for the financials. And now I'll move on to I'll show one example actually of just what our financials look like. Now these are not real numbers, so don't jump out. These are just made up numbers because it's sensitive. But I mean, you can see this is a 10-year view we're looking at. And we had a breakdown of those are real benefit areas. And then we had a net benefit of 400 million, just over 400 million, implementation costs just over 200, an MPV of 55. But as I said, they're not real numbers, but it just illustrates what the output was. So I'll move on to non-financial. So non-financial is a harder one, obviously, because you can't necessarily put pounds and pence against it. The big area for BT was risk reduction benefits. So that's things like risk of system failure, risk of data breach, risk of fraudulent behaviour, risk that you're going to make the wrong investment decisions, wrong MI. So all those things need to be considered. Now, the problem was that this was the biggest benefit of doing finance transformation. This is more than all that efficiency saving, more than all the numbers in the cash flow. This was the thing that was keeping the board up at night, and this was the thing that we needed to have in the business case. So what do we do? Well, it was multiple approaches. So, for example, on our systems, we listed out all our 100 plus systems and we did heat maps. And we looked at the risk in different types of risk, and we put heat maps to make it really visual. We then looked at risk assessments, and we took each risk and we looked at how would that manifest, examples of how it would manifest, value it and put a cost to the business, and then looked at the change in risk probability before and after, and then put a financial number against it. Now that number wasn't in a business case in a cash flow, but it was certainly in the business case on a report. And then we did dashboards and we did reports, so it was all properly communicated. So the key thing here was bringing to life all the non-financial aspects. And the feedback when we took it to the board was they loved that they could really relate to it, and that was the thing keeping them up. So they appreciated it, and it was very, very effective. So this is an example of a heat map. So these are not all the finance systems. So on the left, you've got the finance systems, and then across the top, you've got the different areas. So red is a critical situation. So it's highly red. You've got end of service life. You've got resilience, etc. across the top, different categories. So that was then monitored and reviewed over the life of the implementation. Another example report was the risk assessment. So this gives you a risk assessment. It's showing the examples of, this is a controls risk example, but it shows how the impact was sizable. You know, in 20 years, it can be a 600 million impact. The percentage change was 45% going to 10%, and that would be a weighted average risk reduction of 105 million. Again, these are just example numbers, they're not exact real numbers. So we've now got a business case. So now what do we do? How do we actually make sure we're getting that return? So the first thing to do is make people and suppliers accountable for delivering it, and that will help drive the right behaviours. So the areas examples are internal people, so there's the CTO, CFO, there's the benefits owners, so the people who are going to make the savings in the business. The problems we've got are, one is, if you do a program, the program directors are happy to deliver a program, they're happy to implement systems, change management process, but they're not the guys that are going to be making people redundant or closing down a role. That's a different person. So it's trying to make sure that both sides have got the incentive and the right behaviours. And we didn't actually have a framework anyway, and we didn't clearly define the accountability. We didn't have that to begin with. So what do we do? Well, firstly, we did a RACI assessment, which is responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, against every stakeholder. We then adjusted people's budgets, whether you're a cost owner or whether you're making efficiencies. Every budget was changed to build in what the business case was saying. So everyone became very, very accountable and could see it every time they saw their budget report. We not only did that, we built in their bonuses related to it. So you had a financial incentive to deliver on it. And then lastly, we didn't just do it at the budget holder level, we did it every level in the business, whether it's an operational level all the way right up to board level. So they all had the incentives to deliver it. And that was a really strong proposition. In terms of suppliers, now this is getting harder now because you're outside the business, but we still wanted to incentivize our suppliers. So it's mainly a transformation partner and a systems integrator. Problem we have is that there's a natural tendency to move to a sort of a bums on seats basis rather than output basis. And really what you want to do is get them incentivized to deliver outputs. So what we did is we looked at how we could restructure things. So we looked at building the contracts around milestone delivery, phase delivery, holdbacks on satisfaction to make sure they're actually delivering outputs rather than just we're paying for bodies. We tried to get benefits put in and saying, look, if we achieve a certain cash benefit, we'll give you something, but that went too far. They didn't want that. So we had to stop with that. But anyway, we changed the contracts, and that was very, very effective. Didn't go all the way. We couldn't get them all like that, but we did as far as we could. And then it was solid governance around that, managing it So I had weekly or monthly reviews with the key suppliers, managing it, ensuring that they're following that governance. So step 3, we've got these people accountable, but are they necessarily going to do anything? And the key thing here is measuring the outcomes. If you know you're going to be measured, you typically will conform. So the better we could measure that what they're doing and how they're performing, the more effective it became. The other thing is, if we can measure things, we can actually see whether we're on track to deliver our ROI. So it helped to put interventions in place and ensure, which was the case, we did need to put interventions in place. So how do we measure? So investment costs. The problem is we didn't actually have a decent project accounting system. So we had all these costs, investment costs around the system, around the organisation, didn't have a project accounting. Ironically, this is the project to put in a system for project accounting, but we didn't have it at the time. So what did we do? We had to rely on what we had. So it was Excel models, quite manual process. It worked, but it was tough and quite labour intensive, and using our existing ledgers to track all our cost spend. In terms of benefits, so we didn't have any governance in place for benefits, and we didn't have any means of measure. So it really was taking action and starting from scratch and building a process for reviewing monthly, quarterly, annual. We looked at the granularity of how we're going to record and look at our actuals. So at one point we said, look, let's take all these 4,000 people in the business, plot them out over 5 years, plot their roles out, plot every month what will be, where they'll be, and at the end, and then we'll track it and update it every month for every person. And you got people, it just didn't work. People were reorganising, there were vacancies, people were doing someone else's job. It was just not workable. So we devolved that to the divisions and kept a higher level central. So not everything worked, but we tried our best. The other point is that from BT's perspective, it was publicly announced efficiency savings, and therefore it had to be auditable, all this what we're doing. So it was even more important that we had a robust process to capture it and good reporting. So we needed a governance framework across that, effectively doing that. So one example of an output report, again, these are example numbers. This is just a report showing one division's headcount. So you can see the second line down, efficiencies, is where we're making our savings, and you can see it's reconcilable down to a closing balance. So we've got some sort of control, so we're not taking every saving. If there's a vacancy, then that's not a saving unless the role's actually closed. Obviously a lot more detail behind it, but it's just an example report that we used. So we've now measured it, and then we given up. So I walked over there. Okay, that's about. Okay, so we're with you. So we'd now measured the outcomes. We suddenly found we're not on track. We're not delivering the return on investment we thought we would. So what do? We need to make interventions. Now, everyone's intervention may be different depending on where they're at, but we had 4 areas in particular that we looked at. So this was resourcing, timing, benefits, and then our scope. So I'll just talk briefly through each of these. So as an example, how could we reduce our resource costs? Well, one area was looking at supplier mix. Can we swap out people from more expensive consultants to contractors or in-house resource? Could we look at location of where they're based? Could we assess the grade and use a lower grade person with the same role? The timing. So a lot of the costs were dual running. So where you're having an old system and a new system running together, inevitably you're going to have some of that, but it's making sure that it's the right amount of dual running. It's not overly elongated, because that was very costly. We're also looking at sequencing of events, of work streams and different tasks to make sure we're optimally efficient in terms of our timing. In terms of benefits, this is one area we did look at, was were there any new other opportunities we could deliver further benefit? And one thing we did do was look at offshoring more of our shared service roles. And not only do we get the benefit of the lower cost per person, but we also got more centralisation efficiency. So that was really good. Looking at our targets, we set targets across the group at the outset when we did the business case, but we continually monitored them. And if we thought we could stretch people in the targets and make more efficiencies, we certainly did. We also had opportunities for quick wins. So if you're going to deploy something and there's a delay, there's likely to be a delay in the benefit. But maybe there's a tactical solution that you can still get the realisation of the benefits on time as planned. So we're looking at that. And then scope was a massive area. So it was really looking at the output and saying, is the functionality over-engineered? Can we pull it back? It obviously needs to at least meet the minimum viable product, but making sure the functionality was at the right level to deliver the right benefits. And that was underpinned by a whole scope management process. So that's step 4. Now, step 5 is really having a robust business case management process for the life of the program. So that's an end-to-end process that covers the whole thing, and it's got a governance framework running against it. So the way we worked this was that there was almost like a cycle where you'd have measure your outcomes, looking at what interventions you could do, replanning, and that's a financial plan and an operational plan, feeding that into the business case, and then running that cycle again. And that was continually whirring away over 5 years from beginning to end. Every 3 months, we'd then do an update to the board and say, this is where we're at. So it was that strong linkage to the board. Operationally, everything was linked together. So before I recap on what those 5 steps are again, I'm just going to go through some of our successes and learnings. So in terms of what went well, so measurement went well. We measured things very well. It did drive the right behaviour, so we measured outputs. We drove accountability, and particularly using budget adjustments and putting it in people's budgets really was effective. And thirdly, having a governance framework that wasn't just across the programme, but end-to-end, the whole way across the business, right the way from operational all the way to the board, having it all joined up. That was just so good. In terms of what we could have done better, well, we only had one transformation partner. So when we came to renegotiate halfway through the programme, how are you going to negotiate? They know you're going to go back with them. So it's very difficult. Had we had another transformation partner, we could have had a bit of supplier tension and probably negotiated better terms. The interventions worked very well, but again, I felt they were a bit reactive. We're a bit on the back foot. If we'd looked at our interventions up front and assessed them, we could have actually had them and deployed them quicker and been more responsive. And then the contract structure, I've sort of mentioned this, but it's essentially try and get it as delivery output based as possible. And that means having really good confident plans that you can actually sign up to and get that. So the last one has got 3 really big points, which are, I think, major learnings to me. If someone asked me what are the 3 major learnings, one was getting your data right. So we had a lot of legacy data, as you could probably imagine, from loads and loads of systems from decades and decades. We were halfway through deploying when we realised the data was not fit for purpose. We could not deploy it. So we had to just go back and work well the way through the data, reconciliation month after month after month. We had this juggernaut of a programme going on, spending millions and millions of pounds a month. And we couldn't do anything about it. We couldn't shut the programme down. We just had to get the data right as quick as possible. Had we done that at the beginning, that would have been a huge saving. Programme sequencing, it was a 5-year programme. We tried, after a year, some reason, reducing it to 3.5 years, thinking we could do it all quicker. Sandwiching all the phases together just was completely inefficient, and we realised that this was not going to work. We had to resequence it back to a 5-year programme. That was something that I recommend tread carefully if you're going to try and do that. And then the last thing is software strategy. So when we signed the business case off and had a team ready to go, we didn't actually have a software strategy. We didn't even know who our supplier was. And we spent almost a year deciding on that and agreeing that because we couldn't actually do anything. We were just waiting to go. So getting a strategy right at the beginning is really, really key. So to summarise and recap, the 5 things I think are key to your maximising return on investment is, firstly, have a really good business case. Secondly, make people accountable for that delivery. Third is measure them as much as you possibly can. Fourth is, if things aren't on track, take interventions, do them quickly and effectively to get back on track. And lastly, it needs to be underpinned by business case management end-to-end across the whole process to deliver that. So that's how you maximise your return on investment. Got questions?
I think there were some questions.
Thanks a lot for that. That was very informative. I've got 2 questions. So bearing in mind my mind is slowly going with age, I hope I remember both of them. The first one was you were sad that the granularity by employee measure didn't really pan out. So my first question is, were you able to pivot it so it did work out, or were you able to find a substitute for that one? Second question is about the data issue. That data is never correct, but we also know that it will never be fully perfect. You won't have everything reconciling at any given time. So do you still feel that it added cost, or do you think that delaying the project until you had data right would instead have pushed benefits down, so that in the end, you were still better off just rolling out and, okay, you're going to have a cost from data not being perfect, but you were still rolling out, so you were realizing benefits at an earlier point that you would otherwise have done?
Yeah. So, so in terms of the data, first of all, I mean, the benefits were realised at the same time, whether we'd done the data during or before, but the costs were higher doing the data, because what we're doing is we're running a program with a significant overhead, and therefore it would have been a lot better to have done it sequentially rather than up front. So, I think that's basically it. No, we didn't have to get at 100%. We set criteria on what was critical and what percentage we could get to when we did our reconciliations. We get to a point where we're comfortable enough to be able to deliver that. Sorry, what the first question? Just yeah. Okay, so I mean, we did have another solution. We devolved that down to the divisions to manage rather than held that centrally, and got a more of a higher level output report that we did. They did less forecasting. They probably only went about a year ahead, whereas we originally tried to do a 5-year view. So there was something we did take out. Right, so any other questions on the floor? I'll come to these. Okay, time-wise. How did you keep all finance colleagues motivated and support the work required to implement the new system when mass redundancies were the result? So that is obviously tricky, and I think it was very clear right up front what we were doing as a business. So it wasn't something that, okay, let's implement this and in the end everyone goes. So I think that was one important, so people realised. I think the time frames also helped. So there was a lot of natural attrition. So most people probably weren't made redundant in the end. We managed to reuse resource over 5-6 years, and therefore redundancy was a lot less. There were areas that we looked at which was difficult, particularly when it's a small area like payroll or something, when people know actually half the payroll is going to go. That was tricky. Are we okay time-wise, or questions, or? Time's up. Okay. Yeah, well, I'm around, so.
Thank you, Chris.
Great.
Thank you. I really liked your last slide, you're summarizing, and another key takeaway for me was the importance of getting your data right and choosing a solve-based strategy up front, which, as you said, it's like, yes, it seems obvious, but we miss these things. So thank you for the great reminder. Thank you.